rejected by every shark, then sold for $1 billion. Picture this. You're sitting in the studio of a national television show. 5 billionaire investors are sitting across from you. You just asked them for $700,000 for 10% of your company. And one by one, all five of them say no. You stand up and walk off that stage with absolutely nothing, while your company's bank account at that exact moment holds somewhere around $10,000 to $20,000, and 8 employees are waiting to find out if the company survives at all. This isn't a hypothetical story. This actually happened on the set of Shark Tank back in 2013. And you know how this story ended 5 years later? That same person sold that same company to Amazon for approximately $1 billion. One of the very investors who told him no in that studio later publicly called that rejection possibly the biggest miss in the entire history of the show. Today, we're breaking down this whole story from beginning to end. How an ordinary guy who simply couldn't hear his doorbell in the garage accidentally created a product that now sits in tens of millions of homes worldwide. And most importantly, what you can actually take away from this story for yourself, even if you'll never end up in a room full of billionaire investors. 1. It all started with an annoying, everyday problem. Back in 2011, a man named Jamie Siminoff was annoyed by one simple thing. He worked out of his garage, and he just couldn't hear when someone rang his doorbell. He'd recently gotten one of the first iPhones, and he thought, why isn't there a doorbell that could send a notification straight to my phone? He wasn't planning to build a massive company. He grabbed a camera, hacked a few things together, and put together a device he called the doorbot, sort of a door robot. He installed it on the front door of his own house. And that's where the first genuinely important moment of this whole story happened. His wife told him she felt a lot safer at home now because she could see and hear who was at the door without even walking over to it. That one offhand comment showed Siminoff that he hadn't just built a fun gadget, he'd built a tool that solved a real safety problem. 2. The path from garage prototype to desperate straits. The company was officially founded in 2012. The project raised money through crowdfunding, almost $364,000, even more than originally asked for. But by the end of 2013, the company's situation had gotten scary. There were only 8 people on staff. Development and manufacturing costs were climbing faster than sales. By Siminoff's own account, the company's bank account had shrunk to somewhere around $10,000 to $20,000. Meaning it was literally a matter of weeks before the money ran out completely. It was at exactly that critical moment that a fellow entrepreneur suggested he try out for Shark Tank, a television show where early-stage entrepreneurs pitch their ideas to billionaire investors live on camera, hoping to land funding. Siminoff sent in an application, and within a few months, he was invited to film. 3. The actual moment of rejection. November 2013. Siminoff walks on stage, presents his device called the doorbot, and asks investors for $700,000 for 10% of the company, valuing the whole business at $7 million. The investors hit him with doubts and questions. Some doubted the market was even ready for a product like this. Some said openly they didn't see how this company could grow into anything bigger than a niche gadget. The only one who offered any kind of deal terms at all was an investor nicknamed Mr. Wonderful, but the terms he proposed felt unacceptable to Siminoff, and he turned them down himself. In the end, all 5 investors said no. Siminoff walked off that stage with $0 in investment, despite having spent around $10,000 of his own money just preparing props for the pitch, and his small team having spent an entire month preparing for those few minutes on screen. In his own words, he was crushed in that moment. Each investor's rejection hit him hard, something he later described in interviews as feeling it land square in his chest. 4. The unexpected twist nobody saw coming. Here's where the most interesting part of this story actually begins, the part most people miss when they only hear about the rejection itself. Even though not a single investor put in money, The episode still aired on national television. And it turned out that the publicity from just appearing on the show alone brought the company roughly $5 million in additional sales over the following months. People saw the product on TV, got interested, and started buying it directly, even without any backing from major investors. Siminoff later said that appearing on the show literally saved the company from shutting down, despite the fact that, on paper, he'd walked off that set as the loser. That's the first major lesson in this story. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can get from a public failure isn't approval at all. It's simply the attention of enough of the right people. 5. Turning the doorbell into Ring. Realizing the product needed real improvement, not just a new name, Siminoff's team spent the following year completely reworking the device, improving the video quality, adding motion detection, and adding cloud recording of captured footage. In September 2014, the company officially rebranded from Doorbot to Ring, a more serious name for a product now positioned not just as a gadget, but as a full home security system. By 2015, billionaire Virgin founder Richard Branson personally invested in the company. In his own words, he was stunned to learn that the investors on that TV show had turned Siminoff down. The value of the product for home safety seemed obvious to him. 6. The road to $1 billion. From there, the company kept growing at an explosive pace. At one point, its share of the American video doorbell market climbed to nearly 97%, practically a total monopoly in its niche. The company raised more than $200 million in total from various funds and private investors over several years of growth. Then in February 2018, exactly 5 years after that failed Shark Tank pitch, it was announced that Amazon was acquiring Ring for approximately $1.1 billion. Siminoff personally described himself as incredibly happy in that moment. And one of the very investors who'd rejected him on the show 5 years earlier publicly admitted in a CNBC interview that it was probably the biggest miss in the show's entire history. Another investor who'd passed on the deal wrote years later on social media that even now, knowing the final outcome, he still wouldn't have invested in a company that needed to raise such enormous sums of money relative to the modest revenue it had at the time of that pitch. That's a genuinely interesting detail. Even in hindsight, experienced investors still disagree about whether this deal was ever as obviously good as it looks now, knowing how the story ended. 7. What the product looks like today. Today, more than a decade after that original garage prototype, Ring devices are used by more than 10 million people worldwide. The company has long since expanded beyond just doorbells. Its product line now includes security cameras, whole home alarm systems, and a neighborhood watch app used by millions of people to share footage and safety information across their communities. 8. The real business lesson in this story. So what's the actual point of this whole story for you? It's not that you need to go on a TV show with investors. And it's definitely not that every rejection turns into $1 billion. Most rejections stay just that, rejections. The real lesson is different. Siminoff didn't spend his time and energy trying to prove the people who rejected him wrong. He took the one genuinely useful thing that failure gave him, attention, and turned it into real sales and real growth for the product. He didn't rename the company out of stubbornness or spite. He did it after actually improving the product itself, adding exactly what had been missing the first time around. That's the exact same pattern that shows up in almost every real success story we've covered in this series. How you respond to failure matters more than the failure itself. Rejection, failure, public embarrassment, these are just events on a timeline. The only thing that actually matters is the specific action taken right after that event. Wrap up. Let's bring the key facts and lessons of this story together. 1. It all started with a simple, everyday problem. A guy in his garage couldn't hear his doorbell and decided to connect it to his phone. 2. By the time of the Shark Tank pitch, the company had literally just a few $1,000s left and 8 employees waiting to see what would happen. 3. All 5 investors said no, and the founder walked off stage with $0 in funding. 4. The publicity from simply appearing on the show alone brought in about $5 million in additional sales, despite the formal rejection from investors. 5. The company completely reworked the product and renamed it from Doorbell to Ring, after which it landed billionaire Richard Branson as a private investor. 6. The company reached a near-monopoly share of the American video doorbell market and was bought by Amazon for approximately $1.1 billion, exactly 5 years after that failed TV pitch. And 7. The most important point: the real value in this story isn't the rejection itself or how dramatic it was, it's what happened right afterward, turning the one asset that failure actually provided, public attention, into real growth instead of spending energy on hurt feelings or trying to prove a point. If you had to take just one lesson from this whole story, here it is: you will get rejected. Not once, but many times, in different forms at different stages. The difference between people who give up after rejection and people who eventually build something enormous isn't that the second group never hears no. It's what they do in the first few weeks after hearing it. Leave a comment and tell me, what's the biggest rejection in your life that ended up turning into something good? And if this story gave you a new way to look at failure, subscribe, because there's a lot more coming on how the wealthiest and most successful people on the planet actually think about money and success.